What can I even say about all this? I was coaching myself about all this shit. I kept talking and just trying to coach myself about this because I'm not really sure what this is going to be. I know I want to talk about these groups that are opposed to pornography. And I was trying to figure out how to organize this. And Wikipedia actually gave me a great sort of way of doing it. They listed like the first sentence, and they threw religious views as a reason, as one of the main reasons. Kind of a feminist thing, which is kind of an avocation for what I just kind of off top. I understand that the feminist opposition is actually it's opposition for some, it's an advocacy for something else, and that's just sort of your take. And then you have specific things like what if I had to break it down when they listed religious, feminism, and then the product itself, which is the effects that the product that seems to give to the public in viewing. So, and looking at each of these variations, I sort of try to understand what is the substance behind the variations. When I think of the religious stuff, that is, we'll say strategy. And it's like a viewpoint about in the importance of being modest and being virtuous, and that is a strategy in terms of how to live. Now, when it comes to the religious stuff, there's so many places I can go with, and when reading all this stuff, I think I kind of conjured kind of what's behind it all. Like I kind of, if you can squeeze it, if it was like a kind of a big lemon squeeze, and you got kind of the basis of what the flowing juices of it all. Language. It's not a bad in itself approach to living, having a kind of modesty sort of aspect to it in itself. Like, you have this kind of lifestyle. Like people's range of, in terms of how to live. I mean, they're completely. It's not even so much like you have these big religious movements in opposition to porn. I mean, those are the big companies you'll hear about. You'll throw out. You'll hear names. Exodus, Cry. You'll hear these sort of big ideas, and there's no way I can argue against the religion itself, because then I would have to argue against the religion itself. And while humans are malleable for change, and even in that, I mean, there's plenty of people who are religious who aren't necessarily opposed to porn or opposed to casual sex in general. That's sort of the thing, though. Like, when we're talking about the religious stuff, is it that they're in opposition to porn? I can say that about the feminist movement. I can say that about the personal effects movement, like the NoFap. I can say that it's less about pornography. Like, pornography in these, when it comes to the big movements, yes, that will be like a strategy to go for. Go after the Pornhubs and these big tube sites, right? Because, which is an easy place to go, because with the nature of the internet, there's a lot of entropy moving through. So the thing that was the issue with Pornhub is an issue that all these other platforms had, which is the influx of this entropy. So you have pornography that unsanctionable pornography that was running through these organizations because of just the overall entropy of it all. There's so many individual people in groups that have access to this technology that are in themselves can be. There's potential for those people to be very savvy and be able to get through these. And then there's just infrastructures in business. I mean, one of the things you'll find with every single business is that you have the business itself, which is consistent with other businesses, and then you have a belief system about these businesses. And I think people they really want to see governments, they want to see big entities like Pornhub, and you want to believe that they're integral, right? They're everything has this padlock, and everything has this kind of very, very detailed security. But if you've been in the military, you know that usually a lot of the security is actually responses to something. It's a business that's trying to make money. Now, as far as whether they were lacking in security, now that is something that someone can easily say without knowing the company. Again, you might uphold this belief about big companies, and some people still have these sort of beliefs of big companies. Like, you're Pornhub, how are you not secure about this stuff? Now, that is a detail that reading into it, that you understand that either it's like this is still it's still kind of in its infancy. I mean, with these tube sites, it's kind of the Wild West. And it just seems it seems kind of unfair to blame so much of the entropy and unsanctionable porn going into these sort of places. Because places like Twitter apparently have even bigger issues. Places like Instagram have even bigger issues. Because they have a much wider audience than something like Pornhub. So naturally, they're going to have much more of an issue there. Now, of course, since we're talking about porn and sort of the mindsets toward, I guess, as a business, well, as a practice really, but just because that's what people are in opposition of for the most part. And they'll get into the business part if they really want to stick it to them. And they'll, so the strategy of like looking at the internet. The internet is still the Wild West for the most part, and with so much influx of potentials, and people they're just kind of flushed with all this stuff. Like reading about some of the people who were involved in some of these unsanctionable porn videos that were uploaded to like Pornhub and stuff. That makes sense because it was the Wild West. I mean, it's sort of easy to blame this platform for doing it when, for and large, they didn't really being verified wasn't so necessary. It was almost like any other tube site. It was very much Hufflepuff territory, much like YouTube, where it was just kind of a place for people to upload their own expression. It was a hosting site, and they didn't really know how strenuous. First of all, how many people were actually in security? And it seems that there was. I don't know. It's one of those things where I would like to know more details about that. I'm more talking in terms of the broad spectrum when it comes to these infrastructures. And again, like I mentioned this before, like if you've been in these sort of organizations like the military, you know that the perception that these big corporations can just sort of the security would become more tighter as you learn more about the screw-ups, and especially with so much information going through these sites that their strategy was just kind of to pull the plug and turn the like Pornhub, turn it into almost like a more of a platform that content creators can share their videos, and for customers to basically visit the site to just see these content creators. Which again, I think is ultimately nice in overall. Meaning that even though it's not the Wild West anymore, I think it, there is a necessary. Well, I wouldn't say necessary, but I would say it's nice in that infrastructurally is nice that people um, that recognizably Pornhub has now become more of a hosting site for content creators, and that customers are basically visiting the site for content creators and less about just finding porn to look at. And that this gives content creators the ability to be a lot more creative about the way we went about it. So they're likely to be noticed. I mean, just as long as Pornhub continues to be popular among the common clay, that they'll have their influx of customers coming in and being able to be generally interested in seeing these content creators. So that's nice. So there's kind of a happy, I guess, a silver lining in that, with it being kind of down to its bare bones of just that there's so many places you can go. It could be more of a production agency, and that these are now their stars, and so they can kind of go from there. So that's kind of nice. But when it comes to religious views, and this is interesting considering, well, I was going to mention myself when it comes to religious views. I never really had any condemnations about pornography in itself. I think maybe I'm not a good example because I definitely not a good example. I'm not a good example. We'll just stick to generally with at least what I say with the common clay. The strategy of keeping to kind of a modest sort of and the way that you engage with sex, again, in itself is kind of a nice strategy. One of the things that's kind of interesting is the shame and sort of the angles that they go with. Waiting for kind of an institution. So there is a strategy in that being modest in itself is one thing. And at least in a social modesty, I mean, the ability to masturbate and have fun with your own mind and using some other content, that is pretty cool. But they almost seem to have this overall kind of this sort of, it doesn't start with shame, because shame comes, discovering your own sexuality. I mean, sex is automotive. It's something that's natural in you. The shame comes out of the fact that it's naturally there. Being able to exploit is something that is necessary. Man, it's I don't know. It's like they continue to create their own disease, and then they get confused. Like the idea of being modest about your sexual activities, in itself, everyone should be modest or should have some sort of molestation in terms of everything they do that's pleasurable, for pacing and to keep things interesting. Specifically, because sex is automotive, so you're going to be habitual. You're going to be habituated by some of the things you might do. So it's always good to be modest in some way, so it creates more interest in it, to maintain a sort of a pace with it and a steady pace with it. So you don't run into situations where you are still interested in sex, but whatever you're doing to engage in it just isn't as exciting anymore because of the habituation of constantly engaging with it. And some people just have like high sex drives, and so they have to look at creative ways. And that's probably just something that people just should feel allowed to be more experimental with it. Religious people are going to have sex in some way. They're going to be engaging with sex for the most part. Pornography seems to be like an obvious angle to go with in terms of some kind of opposition to it. It's an obvious angle. It's the most natural angle because porn is sex. It is about sex. It is the not necessarily. It's the expression of sex, which is monetized, but it's the expression of sex. Pornography isn't about the business. Pornography isn't about business. That is the sex industry. Pornography in itself is depiction about sex. That may not have anything to do with business. that can just be about art, whether it's drawing, whether it's some sort of expression that can be considered in some kind of depiction of it. So that's very loose, and of course people have different ideas. I've heard pornography has been defined as anything that's exploitive, not even necessarily sexual. Some people might call some kind of violence pornographic, in that it's almost there's like a rawness to it all. But when it comes to religious, I can talk. I don't really want to mention any specific names. I could. I mentioned Exodus Cry, or did I? Well, if I didn't, I'm mentioning it now. Because it's under one compass. I mean, right now when it comes to the strategy they're using one of the third topics. The third topic I was talking about, which is the effects of pornography. And they also use some of the feminists. It's kind of a mix. With Exodus Cry, it seems that they're using a mix of. No, they're taking their own modesty, so they have a set sort of foundation, right? That being modest about sex, and not to be casual about it. And then they use like what you might mostly find with feminist views, which is that don't you know that it's actually bad for a particular gender to do, specifically women. And then like, well, don't you know? Not only that it's bad because these people that it's exploiting these women and people who are underage. That you also have the personal effects of it, with porn addiction and well, generally it being like whatever effects it causes the brain and that being negative, So it's like a mix of it. They have the set foundation, but they have all these different. And what makes it work is because there is this general sort of there's this consistent. When it comes to, I don't know if we have to look at the crusade. Obviously, because this stuff is seen to be malleable, because there are of course people who are pro this depicting sex in this way. There's a pro crowd in it, and there's people who aren't pro or against. They're just kind of casual people who engage with it. But because of these opposing sides, I think that's what drives their own opposition to it, if any at all. And it's kind of this is why I meant like it might ultimately always be kind of controversial. As bare bones, if you don't have religion, if you don't have these grand oppositions to it, whether it's advocation for a particular gender being involved or being exploited in the industry, or just in general, or we're talking the effects, the what seems to be, well, it's not where scientifically it doesn't seem too bad. Well, not the idea of sex addictions, even though that in itself is also kind of controversial. Because again, I brought this up before, because sex starts off being natural. It's an automotive thing. So a lot of this ends up being mixed with having a high sex drive, being habituated. And again, like one of the things that's interesting about sexuality that people fail to recognize is that when you are sexually driven, when you're aroused, that it's actually what's the word? It's actually naturally supposed to. Man, I had this word and now I just lost this word. Jesus. And it's actually such an important word to bring up. I keep thinking paralyzed, and I was like, that's not the word. Something to do with how the sex drives work, in that it's actually kind of supposed to impair you a little bit, because being aroused impairs a little bit of your sensibilities. It's necessary in order to drive a fetish, because sexual arousal is actually revolve around fetishizing something, and so it's supposed to kind of impair you. I wish people would recognize that more, that sexual arousal impairs your senses a little bit. It's supposed to make you feel a little bit more lucid. It drives you more likely to do something. And so it's a necessary drive in order to achieve erections and the gratification. I mean, gratification is necessary. It should feel good. Otherwise, we're not going to be able. You're less likely to be into it. Because it's such a strong feeling, it can be mixed with. It's like that whole, the line of there's a thin line between love and hate. The course idea is that because you're both extremely strong feelings, and those things can be. It's like you're at this level already, so you can be super horny and be super enraged. Have you ever been like walked in on, or something like you're at this super high, and then when someone comes in, you're at a high, but now it's just like the feelings are differentiated. So you can't be like and this high and then just super. No, it's going to be you're at this high and then you stay there. You might just switch the emotion, and that's the same kind of fear. It's very similar. So it just seems to be this. They're creating your own disease. That's actually more likely than what they're suggesting when it comes to the effects of pornography. When it comes to religious stuff, it seems to just be driven by this foundation of being modest. And the angle of, how do I maintain a sort of to be kind of in a good light, whether that religious kind of I guess road is leading to a finality which you hope to gain a kind of there's a kind of jubilee kind of a celebration. There's an angle, a way to go. People want to feel like they're on a right path, and so that's where you get religion. It's just like a mix of different things, but the consensus seems to be most religious people, I imagine, aren't even necessarily opposed to porn. They might socially be opposed to it, or in some way. Humans are not like. Tend to be a very mix of different things, and you might have extreme sort of takes on it. But for the most part, people seem to be kind of in between. You might have different ideas depending on where you are in space or in your mind about it. And when with religion stuff, it's probably the hardest thing to be in opposition of, as far as working toward fixing that, because these people are going to breed more people who are going to have the same exact. Also, metaphorically and actually, the book that, this is kind of an interesting book club, whether it's church or whether it's whatever practice they're using. Kind of this really hard clause book club, and it's a book that's consistent. It's the same for the most part. Specifically with the Bible or whatever, a Quran, whatever they're using to extrapolate these sort of things. And a lot of it is extrapolation, a lot of it is in the text about being modest and such. And so it makes sense that they would want to keep this line. That's really difficult to get past. You would just have to get policies behind your organizations. You have to get Congress members behind it, and you have to continue to. This is this is the reason why people are really worried about like Kamala Harris, because like a lot of people, it's like there's a lot of people who have oppositions to pornography from like it almost seems like there's almost like a general basis, like meaning that you may not even be like have any sort of extreme oppositions to it, but you generally might sway with a feminist viewpoint, with the negative effects viewpoint, or the religious viewpoint. But even in the general sense, people would hold this belief that there is generally something wrong with the industry, or the fact that people engage with it, they have these stigmas about people who are engaged with it. So there's so many negative viewpoints. It's like being African American. It's there's almost all these negative connotation as being African American, being black. It's similar only in that the parallel, of course, is just because there's all these negative things about it. And again, I don't know. I also have this theory about being African American and having having darker skin tone, that there might be a natural tendency for people to have a negative effect toward it. I think it might be a scientifically found thing, like something you might find in nature. You know the baby test? You have these. They bring in a bunch of offspring, and they'd have them like show them two babies with opposing skin tones, and they would go with the lighter doll. They would say that the lighter doll would be is like good, or whatever, a general goodness, and then the darker one is like perceived as evil or just negative. And on the one hand, it's like, the conclusion was like these kids are being bred these racist ideas, or it could be sort of like darkness and light, like you're. We're creatures that vary in skin tone, but we're creatures that are consistent in terms of how we go about it. There are people who are generally like there are people who are nocturnal for sure, but I honestly think that humans navigate the way that we navigate in the daylight, and so there might be this. It might be a mental thing where you're just, especially when you look at the people of those in that physical stage, and mental stage, they might just see it might be as simple as they're generally going to agree that lighter things are going to be considered things that are okay, things that could be around. Darker shaded stuff, like we generally are creatures that don't want to be in the dark, so it might just be as simple as that. And that's relevant here because when we're talking about sex being such a primary interest for humans, that there might derive some kind of need to have some manifestation in it, even and of course for people who don't or generally don't have need or know not that doesn't affect them in that way. Also, people have different temperaments, so some people are more likely to I don't know. Well, people vary in behavior, so that's something to consider. I sympathize with the religious point of view. If you understand not where they're coming from, but the idea that you have to understand their foundation, right? Like they just generally don't want to see casual sex as a good thing. Like you can sympathize because they believe something is bad. I've said this before in another video when I said people want to believe that they're doing the right thing. You sympathize with them because they believe that this thing is bad. They believe it's bad. They believe it's negative. They believe it's evil. And so, in their minds, it's like from their perspective, they must feel like it's so horrible. This pornography stuff is around. Like you can sympathize because of that set foundation. They're incorrect, or they're so incorrect about so many things. Humans in general, I feel like, at this point in space, with what's active in terms of sensibilities, the people who generally are wrong about this topic, and it makes sense. And the only solution I can see is that the way that religion tends to kind of bend their own sort of rules, they would have to do it here. I mean, they either have to kind of agree to disagree. It's like, some people are into this, and we don't do this because we're religious, but we're kind of like how I wonder how they go about the gender norms. How they're going about gender norms. I mean, that gives me a lot of hope that the way that religious people are bending more and more about gender rules and norms, despite there being hard lines about realities, but that they're able to bend those. That at least for people who engage in this, maybe this is why it's important for these terminologies like sex work. So to give a general sense that like, yes, people do things that, I don't know, even maybe make comparisons, like sports, like extreme sports, people who engage in boxing, other combat endeavors. Maybe make the argument that, make comparisons, maybe that's a way, just make them more malleable to at least be empathetic toward people who are doing things they may disagree with. Now moving on to the feminist stuff, and again, I am speaking in broad terms because I don't really mention anyone specific because I don't know. It's something about putting people on blast like this. Like I don't mind mentioning people specifically, but when it comes to stuff like this, I don't really want to. I'm not really someone who's like I'm not a critic. I don't like to criticize people. I don't like to go in there and just like this person's bad. This person. I don't want to do that. I generally want to take their ideas and I just want to talk about those ideas. And that this is not an attack. You're just a person. I'm someone. I'm not really into punishment. I'm not really into retribution so much because I know that's a natural drive for humans. So that's how I want to be modest in that stuff because I want to be very careful. I mean, we are just animals. We are just creatures. So we have to be very careful how we go about things. And I don't want to just throw these people at the mob. I just don't want to talk about anyone specifically. I just don't think that's not always the best strategy. It's okay. It's one thing to attack people at a certain point. That's what you believe. Go after the points. I don't really want to go after specific people. I'd rather just listen to their ideas and talk about their ideas, and because it's not really important to specific people. I know that there's policies, and politics in it, and people are head honchos of those policies, But I don't really want to talk about specific people. I'm so glad I'm really bad at names because, if I'm going to talk about someone specifically, I'd rather talk about them in a positive light, not really a negative light. So, but we'll move on to the feminist stuff. So, advocacy. That's a huge thing. When I think about the feminist movement and their opposition to porn, I think of advocacy. And I'm very empathetic toward their advocacy. They're huge in they're advocates. They have an advocacy specifically for women who engage with this stuff because they have this idea. They're trying to fight the patriarchy. I've heard this term basically that there is this sort of battle between the sexes when it comes to gender specifically. And whoever holds the keys to big decisions and bodies, and so there's this general. When it comes to the feminist, I feel like I'm starting to see that there's enough, there's enough papers out there that you have these movements that are for the advocacy. They advocate for women, so that's why they're opposed to pornography. Now, there's a lot of people that seems to be kind of. It almost seems like who's listening to who, right? There's all these figures in these movements, in these waves of movements, and there's these figures that would have. Even though they're always going to advocate for females because of this, because of the status, and so changing the status by lifting maybe policies that are going to make things more difficult for women. And so I'm very empathetic toward it. And it's one of those topics I feel like there's least of an issue there. There's still some people who are considered themselves feminists who have this overall opposition to pornography. And I would just say that they just need to ask the people who are in the business. Now, of course, I think generally I'd hear that people would just like, well, they're obviously lying to themselves, lying about their experiences. Whether that because look, when we're talking about the porn industry again, that's the thing about pornography. It's like we are either talking about it as a a thing like music. Pornography should be seen as more like what music is. It shouldn't be. It's not like pro wrestling. The WWE is not pro wrestling. It is a pro wrestling company. It is not what it is. Pornography is synonymous with the sex industry, but that's not what it is. Pornography isn't the sex industry. Pornography is just a style of depiction. That's it. Specifically about sex. And that's the first thing they need to understand, is that when we're talking about pornography, I really wish people would separate the sex industry from it, because these things get conflated. It's one thing to talk about the sex industry, which is what they're talking about, I guess. Because they're talking about the fact that most people who engage with pornography are typically, they're typically men. Although, the reason I'm kind of hesitant about it, because considering there seems to be different ideas about this, again, because of the whole broad spectrum of pornography, I don't know. I can see a world where women engage with just as much as men, because pornography doesn't have to be the sex industry. It can be several different things. It is just a style of depiction. How pornography isn't just like visual stuff. It could be like toys. It could be actions. It could be a lot of different things. So much so there's like, in the style of watching videos or flipping through photos, a lot more men engage in that because of, whether, of course, the whole thing of men being able to engage with it more. I'm trying to figure out like an accurate way. I don't want to just say things like men are visual creatures. Okay, in the way that they engage, it might be a really good strategy, or maybe there's this whole thing about gender, and it's such a weird place right now. It's like, is gender even real? We're kind of lifting the glue off of a lot of these foundations, so it's hard to talk about this stuff, because it's like, I don't want to be wrong. I don't want to say anything, because it's like, I don't want to be incorrect about something because of the way that we're disengaging with the foundation. Because everything in science typically changes. The only scientific thing you won't find is math. Math tends to be expands. Hey, there's all these different strategies, but the foundation seems to be set when it comes to mathematics. Everything else about science tends to change, because science is just a tool. It's a strategy to understand the natural world. The natural world is ever flowing, but also still kind of a mystery. So we're always discovering things we thought, like something like scientific method. Or I'll give you a great example. The alpha wolf, right? So people who engage with this topic, if you know that it's actually that there isn't a alpha wolf, more that there are parent wolves, more that they might be, parent wolves or mating wolves, but you're not really going to find any alpha wolves. But people who engage with the science, the scientific methods, whatever conclusion you're coming to, the conclusions could be sound, but they can be wrong, because you will say, because no matter what, most of what you're going to find is you're going to extrapolate what those results mean, right? Like, if we engage with this thing and it does this thing, then that means this thing. Not because it definitely means that thing, it just means that, like, we are extrapolating that it does based on whatever tendons we're using. So people will still engage with the whole idea of there being an alpha wolf. There isn't, but it makes sense that because they're using methods. I mean, the guy who came up with this, he used methods too, and they concluded what he thought was conclusion, but he went back and was like, okay, it concluded those things, but I was wrong about the result. The result isn't that. We're seeing all these activities, but the result of it was it. And it actually changed your perspective of those particular details. And that's important, because when it comes to specifically, like when we're talking about the movement, when we're talking about perspectives, and when we're talking about specifically with the feminist movement, at least certain perspectives Overall, it feels like it's kind of a stalemate. I feel like there's a lot of people who engage and have who are pro pornography, and then you have feminists who aren't. And it all seems to just come down to education, you know. This is what I meant when I was saying like they would just kind of believe that the people who do engage with pornography, females, and they'll say that they do enjoy it, they do like it, that they'll just claim that they're denying it or they're lying about it, or you know, they'll even say like, well, some of you guys might, but for overall, like the industry is. And we can talk about the industry. The industry is one of those things where it's like, this is what I meant when I said in the video that like the message of what pornography has been in so many formats, in so many videos or whatever, has gone in the direction of like self-liberation, in terms of sexual expression. Business stuff tends to go in the direction where it's like Slytherin territory, very resourceful, very much. It seems like when it comes to the business side of the sex industry, it's like any other business. It's like depends on the producers you're engaging with. Unfortunately, because of it being pornography, that it's almost like stereotypes. It's like they don't help. They only make it worse. It's almost like when African Americans almost have to do so much more better just to be seen equal, right? Pornography almost has to be perfect in all these ways, even though they run like any other business, which sucks because of the connotation that comes with the negative connotation that comes with pornography. So it just kind of makes it seem worse when it's not really. Plus, because we're talking about sex, we're talking about pornography. I love that line from Harry Potter that says, you know, great, terrible, yes, but great. Because pornography rides that line where it is so broad. Pornography is just a style depiction. It can be so many different things. This is why it's important. This is why I stick to a more amoral approach to everything. You know, because life is objectively meaningless. Morality in itself, ethics are frivolous. Morality doesn't exist in nature, and ethics are frivolous. Well, they're it's a strategy that could work very well. I just mean when I mean frivolous, maybe I should just mean maybe not frivolous. Maybe frivolous is not the right word. It's frivolous. It is frivolous in nature. I just mean in terms of how we engage with each other and behaviors. They might work very well, but okay. So what I'm trying to say is, we are creatures. We are animals, and it is probably the best strategy to just recognize that, because when you recognize that, you realize that morality and ethics are a strategy, but you still have to be open to the entropy, which is we are surrounded by billions of us, and that you cannot expect that people are just going to ride a certain line. People are going to just do it because they're individuals. And it's like, how much do you differ away from the general population, the general common clay, and then how much of that you're just being an individual, right? You know, in everyone's in everyone's sort of sight, you might be a very respectable person, but behind closed doors, you're an individual, and who knows, right? And people, it's like you get together with people, and you get them, they get very casual with you, and you might hear things from them, and it's like, oh wow, I didn't know how many people engaged in that sort of thing, which is is interesting. It's interesting when you get to know people on a personal level. And I think that is just like a sign that just prepare yourself that people are going to range very out when it comes to them people are very much individuals, and mean that in a very I feel like everyone engages in a very amoral sort of way. I mean, it's almost like we're playing a social game with each other, and then when we're outside the game, it's like, how much does that game affect you in your personal life, and how much do you defer away from it when you're alone, right? and that's relevant when we're talking about the entropy that places the internet gets. I mean, think about the comment section. I mean, one of the things that's interesting about the comment section, like on YouTube, is that really think about that entropy. Think about the fact that there's so many people with different sensibilities that can just engage in simply anonymously just adding a comment. Some people I know basically write negative reviews on purpose, not because they have any negative views. They just say it because they're still in junior high, or they're in elementary, or because who cares, right? I'm an anonymous person. They don't know who I am. I can just say what I want, and it could just be like a very, liberal in itself, meaning it's just. This is what I mean when I say like people engage in stuff in a moral and ethical way, and it's like, all these platforms are becoming more engaged with ethics and morality. And itself, it's Hufflepuff territory. It's just like, just a lot. It's almost like these are just generally hosting sites, and naturally just hosting sites that are becoming more engaged with these sort of ideas. And almost like a response. This is the thing about pornography. Generally, is a they're on defense. They're usually a defensive line. They're usually in defense. They're usually on a defensive line. They're usually having to just come across as nice as they can, right? Because we're engaging with sex, and it's so easy to just paint them in a negative light, especially a hosting site. Like, if there's going to be any angle for religious groups, for feminist groups, for these for people who kind of generally feel there's a negative thing about pornography, which we will get to, there's this sort of it makes sense that it's just so easy because sex is it starts off being very personal, and so like people's sensibilities are just kind of whatever those sensibilities are, whether it's coming from their home life or their personal effects, in relations to that, which whatever art form, whether they're video people or magazine people, and how they feel about that stuff, how they personally feel about engaging with it, it's very interesting. So, but when it comes to the feminist movement, at least certain perspectives, it just seems like more education. I feel like the more people want to feel like they're doing the right thing, right? And people want to feel like they're cool, right? People want to feel like they're in. So people who are in opposition to pornography, many of them, I think, will change their mind eventually, they will just like, look, agree to disagree, right? Those are not. I don't really think they're going to be the ones who are going to be the ones who are ultimately going to, because like we're all kind of there. It's almost like a lot of them know that they're not helping with that, so they either just don't even talk about it, So, which again, like I empathize with their thoughts about certain things that go on in the industry, especially when we're talking about specific producers and stuff like that. So I understand, but in totality, the whole opposition to pornography. Talk to your girlfriends. You can talk to the people who are in the industry, and just engage with them, and just like find the way approach. More female producers, maybe more safer environments, or not that that's not happening, but just like I feel like with more engagement that will kind of, and it already kind of has. I just brought it up because that's kind of one of the main topics I was brought up. Now, when it comes to personal effects from pornography, negative effects, claimed to be negative effects. Now, the science and whatever amount of information got into it seems to come back negative consistently. And I suspect, again, it's because people don't understand their own sexuality. I brought Don John in another video. This is a character that... So, Don John believed that he had a porn addiction. Now, presented in the movie, doesn't seem to be a porn addiction because he didn't argue that he just had a high sex drive. He has a convenience, which is his he engaged with pornography using his laptop, internet access on his laptop, and what seems to be more like a high sex drive with a shallow appeal for sex. So it seems like when he engages with women, whether it's through his bartending job slash club life, he doesn't seem to be satisfied with his sexual encounters. He's more satisfied with watching porn. He still has a high sex drive. And again, there's the shame. Again, it's so interesting that because he's definitely a religious person. He engages with his. He has a Catholic belief. So it's interesting that there's an irony there. It's like I don't know why you would do this, yet you're definitely you're a relatively devoted religious person. You show the church. You already present pornography in a negative light by now you engage with it, but you have this set belief. It's like people who get right with Jesus. It's like they are religious, or at least they have this belief in God, and then they're tearing house, and then when things in that house is burned down, they're ready to move on from that. Then it's like we have to get right with Jesus, right? It feels like this. It feels like a person who not necessarily found Jesus, but he held this sort of belief about he didn't have. It's almost all right. That was his pornography was his priority, right? I don't even know if the main actor necessarily had any negative views against pornography. More specifically, Don John. Those things might just conflate because the main actor seems to be it's interesting. I would love to know more about his beliefs specifically because maybe it's out there, but. There's so many details in that movie about it that it's like, why is porn addiction your conclusion? Because you got the religious stuff, so shame. You got your shallow view about sex, so that could explain why you're not satisfied by being engaged with women physically, actually. And you explain in the movie pretty good detail of why you are interested in the sex there. And then by the conclusion of the movie, you seem to change that because you seem to appreciate sex with women. Again, I don't know why that means you have a porn addiction. Then again, this is a point I'm going to bring up about that whole thing. Now, people seem to... I've seen articles say well, maybe they don't have a porn addiction, but they can appreciate, or they at least have a sentiment about their getting out of that sort of engagement with pornography, which the conclusions I read in that seems to be that they're able to disengage with this thing and get on to more productive stuff, which just gets into the whole thing about this belief about being productive in society and not being content and going for whatever goals, which again that's a whole different topic. So that seems to be a strategy in terms of how to talk about this stuff. It's just let's just talk about social hierarchy, well, if it helps them engage more with not necessarily indirectly social hierarchy and productivity and not being a slouch or whatever, even though I have this whole thing about people and their just constant need for their ambitions, which not that ambitions are wrong. Most people's ambitions are based on approval and appeal. And it's one thing, why can't you just have, the thing about, alright, I don't really want to get into that because this is what I mean. People who can graduate, the people who even though they don't agree that they have a porn addiction, but can sympathize why they want to engage in other things and other productivities because we don't want to be. There seems to be this whole thing about you don't want to just settle with mediocrity, which again, these are just sets of beliefs. They're just this whole opposition to contentment, this whole opposition to just being okay. I don't know. That's a whole different topic. And that seems to be something that you find more with a lot of people in the U.S. Other countries do not. You don't see a lot of people in other countries talk about my ambitions and constantly going after something like. And again, like the idea of ambition itself is one thing, but like your ambitions usually tend to be about things that are like shallow in itself, because it's usually. I'm not going to get into specifics as hierarchies are. It's almost like most people are going to engage with hierarchy and trying to metaphorically climb a ladder, or find the business themselves, which is still hierarchy. But they depend on approval in the bill. Most people's goals depend on approval in the bill. They're not ventures that are just like the simple acquisition or the simple inclination. Inclination is the only thing I think you should engage with. The idea of you being successful, which success and failure doesn't really, again, these are ideas that don't really exist in nature. They either work because the result of it is it works or it doesn't work. You don't have to engage with anything with the idea of something being a failure or success. I understand that we live in society, and societies have systems in which there are definite so-called successes and failures. I don't know why you can't just have a string of experiences, and whether or not you come out of those experiences as a success or failure, I don't know why you have to engage with those ideas anyway. If you can accept, maybe this is a little too extreme for people, but if you can accept death, I don't know why you need any sort of. Weirdly, ironically, if you just engage with life without this need for success or failure, and again, that has nothing to do with how much effort or how creativity. It's just that the idea of being successful and fit. I'm not saying those things don't work. I mean, it makes sense that those things will work. Having a failure hanging over your shoulder might refocus you. I'm not saying that doesn't work, but that's all it is. It's of course those things can work. I don't know that it's relevant only in the sense that you're like getting them to not be interested in pornography because the productivity thing, and then this general belief about how we all need to be constantly on something, and don't be content, even though I don't know why you can't just have hobbies and enjoy your little slice of heaven, and that we can have a system that supports that idea, and so we can engage in life where it's not unhealthy. We don't have to take on, we'll canonically work hours. They're just buildings with people in it that sure work. Where it's appropriate, where people can have nap, because those are healthy things. Nap is necessary, actually, for your health. It's actually, unironically, actually going to help productivity if people are able to nap. These are not hot topics. These are literally things found in the science, in your natural bodies. They're unhealthy, what we're doing. Multitasking in itself is pretty unhealthy, actually. You don't even really have a brain that's able to do that well. You think you're doing it well, but you're not. You know how much stuff you can actually do, because you're not multitasking? Multitasking is generally unhealthy. Doing a bunch of shit for a company is kind of unhealthy because of the way that is going to, what that usually entails. You think that's what cavemen were like? I don't think people. I think, again, I know since we had this magical venture, we had this venture called, the big drop. Farming. Farming happened, and then we just kind of started engaging with stuff, which produced more stuff, and then this belief about stuff and how much we need all this stuff, and people are just so they almost have this belief against being happy. Because there's this idea that we can't, mediocrity, even though no one told you to invent TV or this thing or anything. You don't need vehicles. These aren't necessary. It's nice that they're here. You don't even necessarily need the amount of productivity in order for these things would be. We overproduce in food. Anyway, it's irrelevant in that I really don't like that the reasons for clapping that no-fap, and you may not have a porn addiction, but because this idea, because we're just going to let them engage with another sickness, another created disease that we we've overreduced it, which is this disbelief in being content, being happy, but this constant need to. And again, it's weird because they're actually tricking you, because it's one thing to create your own thing, and that you can decide whether you're a failure. So, hell, you don't even need that. You don't need to decide you're a failure. You did the thing, and you liked doing it. That's it. Or you didn't like doing it, so you stopped. It doesn't have to be a success and failure. These things don't exist in nature. Either works or it doesn't. You're either dead or you're not. It's not about success or failure. Anyway, I'm not saying that these, as far as dominance, hierarchy, and social being a social creature, I'm not saying that those things aren't going to be there. I'm just saying that because they don't have to be in such a way that there's the way we engage with them can be malleable. Is all I'm saying, right? These don't let these big names and big heads and big corporations tell you otherwise. Okay? I know that that's the way this society functions, but don't forget that it's super unhealthy. Don't forget that these people are tricking you. Don't forget that these aren't necessary, and that's not going to bring you any sort of satisfaction. And satisfaction should be the goal, not constant need and constant stuff that don't depend on you. They depend on someone saying yes to you. Never mind that we have this weird belief again. I don't know. There's something about people and calling other people dumb or calling people idiots, and there's something, I don't know. It's all social hierarchy and stratification where you are in that line. I don't like calling people, because again, these are things that people can't. People who are you call people dumb, and it's here's the thing. This is the problem with these hierarchy things. Is you might be. This is alright. People who are intimidated by math or reading or something like that, it's your level, even though you're an individual human, and the reason why there are levels because you're short compared to Matt, but you're you. You're only short compared to other people, but it starts with you being an individual. It's the same thing with, I know you're a social creature, but when it comes to so-called dumb people, you're at a place compared to other people. If people would stop with the whole hierarchy thing so much, then you would just see those people as being at their again. I'm not saying that, and honestly, people engaging with, I don't know, people get on my nerves. People treat each other so bad. I don't know. I'm very benevolent. I don't like it. I don't like this sort of and it's so weird. I used to love. I don't know. People want to. I don't know. I don't know. I just have this thing about hierarchies and this belief about people being. I don't. And this is relevant. This because we can't engage with sex work or sex industry or pornography without talking about humans and their excessive need to just to be pitted against each other in such a way, in such a fashion that's just so unnecessary. And my God. Anyway, why have we get it? We got here because the sympathy toward people with generally people who have this belief about the negative effects of pornography. Granted, the truth is we don't understand their sexuality. It seems to be the conclusion of a lot of these findings and these scientific methods, is that people seem to have a belief about the negative effects about pornography. We already brought up Don John, and that seems to reign true when it comes to a lot of these people who have these beliefs, is they generally don't understand their own sexuality. You understand that sex starts as an automotive thing, is a natural thing, it's a natural tendency. And if you don't accept that, and that you don't accept that being that you have a sex drive, it doesn't mean you don't get habituated. You can be habituated by the things you watch and engage in. It doesn't mean that you don't have a sex drive. You can have just as high as a sex drive. It's this is why there is a sympathy toward being modest, because it can help in engaging with those things a lot more. Now, with the people who have this general belief, my sense in which seems to be, which seems to to follow when I look at these, when I look at the people, the studies, what seems to be consistent in parallel is, I don't like to talk about generations, one, because generations don't exist, and again, it's just another way for people to sell to you. There are no such thing as Gen Xers or boomers. These things just don't exist. They don't even really exist, and it's so arbitrary. And these people themselves say that we don't define generations because, honestly, they're just ways to, they're just ways to sell to people. They're ways to organize people, and while that's a nice strategy, it's also arbitrary. And man, so I won't. What I will say is this: people who come to pornography, specifically the sex industry and how it's presenting pornography. Accurate. I'll be more accurate now. It makes sense that, being that pornography is something that will be specifically like internet pornography, thus pornography is always something that's convenient, something that's always there. It makes sense that people who have always kind of had this in their lives, this is a consistent availability in their lives, and thus an engagement with it, kind of in the kind of, I'll say beginning stages of their puberty and onward. It makes sense that some that because it's not like this. When you are already engaged with something like this, it's one thing to come into this stuff. Like there are people who came into pornography and they had this set idea that that something is bad about that thing. So there's like, but they have a sex drive, and so they're going to be going toward in it. And sex drives are supposed to dismantle your sensibilities anyway, so it makes sense. So there's a follows shame of it. So there's almost like this kind of inner battle. When it comes to people who kind of already had sex available to them, pornography, internet pornography specifically, so that just kind of speaks to it being consistently available as they have a computer in their home, or on their phone, which is what a phone really is at this point. It's just kind of a miniature system, like integral but yet miniaturized system of a computer system. And it's consistent, something that they literally have in their pocket. So they always have the option to look at pornography. I imagine because of that, people engage with different ideas and they're more malleable to, right? This is why it was such a benefit to people who were considered themselves atheistic or agnostic, because people who are coming out of high school, people who are coming out of junior high, even elementary, they're going to be more likely to listen because their beliefs aren't, they have a foundation from the family or whatever, but they're more malleable to change because they're at this point where they're developing, and so they're not exactly wrapped in. Some might, but many of them are more open to different ideas, right? And so I imagine this is why you got the NoFap, which is kind of a digital kind of take engagement with pornography, which is generally kind of a negative. I know it started off kind of a joke, an ironic thing, and then it sort of it became kind of a mantle. And I kind of use this. Obviously, it's not the whole thing is called NoFap, but it's more of like a shortcut, kind of short-term kind of language to get you to my point. So when it comes to people who engage with pornography in this sort of way, this kind of negative viewpoint toward pornography, it makes sense that they're more malleable to these sort of ideas because pornography is always something that's, because of the internet, because, well, not that the internet, more of like they have these computer systems that are convenient to them, so thus the access to it is more convenient. In that I'm being more accurate with my language. I don't want to make it, because people make it sound like a fucking like a virus and shit. It's like, no, it's just that they have these convenient machines, systems that are just kind of close countered, so they can engage with it easier. They literally have phones in their pocket, so thus the internet, thus pornography, and they have a sexual drive, so it makes sense that they're going to engage with it quicker. But that's what I want to talk specifically in that it seems to be that there, when it comes to the belief about porn addiction, again, not knowing or understanding their own sexuality and accepting that their sexual drive are on the motive, and because you're engaging with something that's so convenient, that, remember when I said that, remember, sexuality, sex engagement impairs your sensibility. It's supposed to. When people are saying things like, I've heard this, like they start off with something, they'll say something soft, or like, oh, soft, and then, as I get habituated, I move on to harder and harder stuff like extreme. Even though that extreme, more, they'll say extreme or something in that's supposed to be like communicating harsher or more potent in the way that the porn is in nature. Not in nature. It won't be in nature. It's subjective. It's completely subjective. It's more accurate to say different than what you engage with. Again, sexuality is already supposed to impair you a little bit. So you're already a little bit more open to different things. Naturally. And when you're habituated by something that you're watching, the concern is that you're looking at more extreme stuff, which again is not extreme in itself. Nothing really is. It's just different. And the fact that you're going to be impaired a little bit means that you're more likely to be open to things, because it's all about sexual. And again, like which again, it's like this. It's like you're creating this potential. You're creating this potential because you're impaired and you're masturbating to something, and so you're creating this potential. Now, what this potential is entirely, it almost seems entirely dependent on your set belief about it, right? If you're a sexual creature, you're going to masturbate. And it's not even that you're masturbating. It's more that the potential is there. You're going to have this set sort of gravitation toward being aroused, and pornography is more convenient, thus because of the technology. So you're masturbating, right? And you have this potential. Now, some people, once they come to fruition, they orgasm. Once that clarity sets in, what sets in is whatever is there. Now, you might have this shame, and that shame is whether you have this set belief about it, or you have this general engagement with porn where you have this set idea about what that pornography is. Like, this is weird pornography, this is strange pornography, even if it's just different. It means that either you need to have an openness to what you're watching, which would help. Generally speaking, what I'm saying is that when you have that clarity, and you kind of have this weird disengagement with what you're watching because you have this set belief. Now, whether that thing is considered strange or whatever, maybe strange to you, to your sensibilities, it always ends up being that conversation, like we engage in more and more stuff. There have been celebrities who also engage with this sort of kind of idea that, like, because they've orgasmed and now they have this kind of clarity, that they believe that what they're looking at is a demonstration of their more, I guess, extreme, potent engagement with pornography, right? And again, when you have this shame, or you have this sort of opposition to what you're watching, and you almost have this, we'll say a black closet. You have a sex drive, okay? You're putting things in your black closet. And this closet is going to be open. Now, it's all about what you're telling yourself when you open this black closet. If you're someone that let's say you're watching You start off watching some soft, we'll say softcore, meaning there's no penetration to maybe some hardcore penetration, and then you're habituated from that, so you engage with something that, again, you call extreme when it's not. It's just different. And you associate with extreme. Once that clarity hits, you have to wonder what are you setting up for yourself? If you have this sort of already set shame or ideas about pornography, because you have to understand, it starts with the fact that black closet is there. It's going to open. And you're going to engage with pornography. And because you already are habituated by the things you're watching, that you're going to move on to different things. Not more extreme shit, just different. Okay? Because in order to engage sexually, fetishing is necessary. Fetishes is what gets you to be aroused at all. You wonder why you're interested in titties? Fetishes are incidental. They're necessary in order for you to... Because it's like, well, titties... Well, you know that, like, there are places, and there are even families that that are nudist. In continents in Africa, you have places around the continents of Africa where people are generally more nude, or at least less dressed in, compared to places here. It's not that breasts are less attractive. It's just that they know to engage with fetishes with that. You can fetishize, you can see men's bodies, right, out in the open, but you can also fetishize men's bodies too. Ask gay people. You know what I mean? Ask people like me. You know what I mean? Like, you could see people, and depending on the circumstances, you can engage with depending. Now, people are getting things mixed up here. And it seems that just people have this lack of education about their own sexuality. And that they need to learn that sex is going to impair your sensibilities a little bit, because it's necessary. And so once you have orgasm, what are you getting out of there? What conclusions are you coming to? Once you close that closet, it's still going to be in the closet. Maybe the difference is what are you putting? Not what you put. The closet is just like your build up sexual interest and stuff like that. It's in the back of your mind. It's in the dark, right? I think you should bring some of that stuff to the light, and you want to analyze that stuff. What? Because you might find that you might be into what? Maybe a session with multiple people. Fetishes with engagements with maybe I was trying to look for a word. Damn, I can't think of the word. I'm thinking basically in terms of like if you're someone that's into like poop fetish or maybe water sports, whatever it is. Whether it's porn that deals with multiple people, or deals with some kind of there's an encompassing word that kind of is all those things in it. But you know what I mean? Maybe they're just different. You're already fetishizing breasts, butts. In itself, you might engage with some kind of explanation that has something to do with procreation, which it kind of explains it, but doesn't explain it when you compare to other countries or other civilizations. It's one of those takes that people will kind of go to when you can only go so far with it, right? Like they're there and they're valid, but it doesn't mean that you can't be attracted to other aspects of people. Like people having this weird thing about like don't be attracted to feet, or having an opposition to be attracted to feet. It's become more an acceptable fetish. But they're no different. Like if you think about like in the way you think of breasts, your feet are something you don't see very often. It makes sense to fetishize something that you don't see often, right? A part of something that you don't see. Like That makes sense. And again, sexuality is like very malleable. It's kind of on the line. It's very malleable. It's a broad spectrum, and it's not really set. I mean, people can sort of, especially if your black closet is seeking other things to engage with. I mean, you have to understand that if it's a part of you, if it's like a part of you that kind of impairs you a little bit, then yes, it's going to be more open to other things. But that potential is still there, and you have to think about and analyze, maybe rethink what you're putting in that potential when you reach orgasm. What are you telling yourself? That what you're watching is shameful, what you're watching is bad, what you're watching is extreme, or I might have a sex addiction because you have a high sex drive. Do people even know how to distinguish sex drives from anything else? Again, it's like, well, I'm not working as much, I'm not less productive. I don't know what that means. Like, you have to think about that. That's a little personal thing. Yes, like, people can't be really into other things or not really want to work that much. Like, yeah, that must mean that you have a porn addiction. My marriage was so much ruined because of porn addiction. Again, not necessarily saying that you didn't have a sex addiction. It's just, porn is just kind of a convenient thing. This kind of goes along with what I said, that people sympathize with the idea of like getting away from sex. Again, I don't want to invalidate people's experiences, but I do want you to reanalyze those experiences, because I need you to be open to the idea that you may not be addicted to porn, that there may not be necessarily an issue. Just maybe be more open to things you're into. And again, like engaging with this black closet, you might surprise yourself with the things you might be interested in. And again, I'm amoral in perspective, so, and I accept that we are just animals, and that I don't know, society is hilarious with the way that they go about things. It's interesting that humans don't, not humans, I just mean like our societies, or human societies that we have, not humans in themselves, just more our strategy, our social strategy. We don't engage with this idea that humans are animals that much. I only hear it almost like a hot topic, not like a general sort of way, because we don't really engage with we have these ideas about meaning, and even though life is at least objectively meaningless, and I don't even know why you even need meaning at all. If in that case, also, we don't extend this stuff to other creatures at all. We don't extend this sort of stuff to ants or termites or your dog or your cat. We always just talk about humans and being so, we have these weird beliefs about humans are just like these incredible creatures that might have come from some different. It's insane. I don't know. Like, what is wrong with just kind of accepting the observable plane? It's one thing to entertain the unobservable plane, but just it's like we haven't even accepted this plateau at all. And again, this is relevant because sex is this primary primitive. It's this primary thing, and it feels like we can't talk about this problem with sex without talking about the way we think about us as a creature, an animal, just another animal. And again, I'm not saying that these things are. I'm not saying that there isn't anything about the unobservable plane. Truth is, there's so many things about the unobservable plane. I mean, I'm not saying there aren't ghosts or spirits or anything. What I am saying is that we don't even have a language for that stuff. We have these templates about it. Even those things, we just have templates about them. We don't actually have an accurate language or understanding of those things, either because we ignore them, assume that we're not. And again, even when we're, this is why I don't even call myself a person of science. And I really wish people would stop saying that they're people of science, because that's usually just like a belief system. Because you're just, what I'm saying is the world is just No, all I'm saying is the observer plane itself is a mystery in so many ways. I don't. Why should I sit there and go like those aren't real or this ain't real? If I'm just like an ant, I'm just like you. I'm just like an animal. Why would I? It's weird. By the way, this is what I mean. When people have you seen pictures of the universe or at least parts of it? What we've seen. I mean, to us we would say things like it's incredible. It's kind of insane the way it looks. Why would they then say like what how what this is what I mean by the language and having these set short-term beliefs in these templates. We don't really know what is in the observer plane. We don't really know what any of this stuff is yet. So this is why I'm not going to say there's definitely not this or that. And that's relevant because when we're talking about sex specifically, we have these crazy ideas about almost as if like what do we and we have these ideas and I don't know like when it comes to like well collectively when it comes to man that's a whole different topic. I was going to talk about like non-consensual sex topics, which is a strategy that people engage with. And I talked about this a little bit, how like the entropy of just so many influx of information and people putting in, just being able to just do that, and that security isn't like, people have this idea that security in these big platforms or these giant platforms are just like, they must be on top. They're not. They're just humans. This is what I meant when I was like if you've been in the military specifically or any of these big organizations, you know that like, yeah, what you're gonna find in those buildings are just more people, okay? Like you. I'm sorry, but they can only do as much. They can only do so much, right? They have to be patient. They have to come up with other systems to be able to better engage with that. We don't even have to talk about it. All I was gonna say is like, as far as belief system is concerned, when I'm like, this is what I mean. Like when I said like amoral perspective. I mean, my strategy is I'm an individual, right? I'm just a creature. I'm just a person, right? The fact that I'm a human creature and I'm social in nature is incidental. Sure, it's written in my DNA, but I start with being an individual. Y'all are just creatures around me, right? The way I engage with humans is the way I understand sharks. I understand that they might be beautiful to see, to look at, and even cool to engage with either in books or where they're talking about sharks or dogs or cats. But I understand that dogs and cats and animals and other apes are animals that are dangerous in variance. Y'all are all just as dangerous, if not more dangerous, than other animals. That's what I mean. That's why I'm amoral in perspective, because when I look at y'all, I see you as just creatures, like everything else. I don't have to see humans as anything but. And the fact that you guys see each other like that and yourselves makes you more animalistic to me. To me, it just seems like a strategy in order to conduce yourselves into a more stable, more safer environment. But it's like you guys are in danger of just not engaging with what's more likely the truth, which is that you are just as significant as an ant, which is to say, not at all. The earth doesn't need you and the universe doesn't need the earth. And I think that's fine, because it is what it is. And I see you guys as just the same, because you are, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with me. It's always thing about like when people say you're just a dog. What's wrong with dogs? Why are dogs like the ones that have to be this like weird metaphor about negative? Don't we love dogs? Why do we have to like use them as, what do dogs do to you? Besides, be dogs. That might bite you in the ass, or it depends on where you are. Humans are the same. And it's hilarious if you think otherwise. Have you met people? Like, I don't know. Like, have you met yourself? Do you think you're doing anything that's outside of what animal nature? Like, what do you think you do? What do you think this whole Black Closet media thing is about? What do you think Black Closet is? It's just like the engagement with what's automotive in this brain, in this body of yours. That's all it is. It's just a metaphor for what's there. So, I guess we'll kind of get to a conclusion here. Well, I kind of hit on it, but here's the thing. When it comes to these people, this kind of grand opposition toward pornography, and I've said this, I'm going to say it again, like there might be maybe evolutionary, no, I'm not going to say purpose. I'm going to, because it's just a result. What is change, but just like, what is the result of change? I mean, when we talk about the macro and the micro, micro is consistent, fluent. Macro is the result of it all, right? When I talk about evolution, when I use that term, all I just mean is like there might be something that like it's like predictable that sex is going to be controversial because how primary it is, and so because the way that humans engage with it and generally how us as animals engage with it and the way that we use language and the way that language is, that these might just be a lot of micro things that just the macro of there being religious oppositions, there being gender advocating oppositions, or just these misguided beliefs about the thing you're engaging with because misbeliefs or misunderstandings about your own sexuality and thus sexuality in general. That will always be like a controversial thing, whether we're talking about the Crusade, whether we're talking about whatever came before or after. And again, like, you know, if you've seen any sort of history, you know that how malleable sex has been. So sex has been so many different things. And there's been periods where it's been kind of whatever the hell, you know, conquering the cities, stuff like that, and pillaging and all that stuff. So, like, we know that sex has been so many different things. And as long as you keep on the consistency of it being malleable, that we're close and and I've said this, and I don't know, maybe it was a little too strong. I said that the industry is about to be legitimized by the public, by the mainstream. And part of me is like, that's big too. I feel like I was just like, I'm believing, right? And, you know, especially talking about this and thinking about it, it's like, I don't know, like, they are invariants, but they're also like, because of religion, not because of religion, I mean, people engaging in these ideas and what those ideas are, thus creating these controversies. But, you know, people, more and more people are, it's like, you know, we're looking at people in politics, you know, I hope I didn't say her name, maybe I did, I don't know. I hope I didn't want to mention anyone's specific names. Specifically, like with the presidency, well, we have someone in that bracket that the industry was kind of worried about because of, well, a gender belief that she had, or at least what seemed to be. I'm going to assume that, anyway. What I'm really saying, what I'm basically saying is like, that's where the change is going to happen, right? If there's going to be, it's one thing, it's going to start with the common clay, sort of changing their minds in positions about sex, whether they're easing up a little bit, or they believe in some sort of thing, maybe like with the sex work and there being more female porn producers and stuff like that. Maybe that will kind of exchange or place or replace some of these ideas. Like, all these things might generally, this is what I mean by the macro, the micro, and then the macro is the result of it. So all these little things. And then, of course, the big one, of course, is Congress, of course, a government in general, changing positions and making sure that we protect and we regulate and we have a general consensus about the sex industry. And I have a good, this is what I'm like. Maybe I spoke too soon. Well, it's going to happen, and it's already kind of happening. But I just mean like, hopefully, there's not like this. I mean, what happened with MindGeek? It's like, I don't know if it's like, who knows? Yeah. Anyway, I think I'll end it here. Just try to educate yourselves if you haven't already. Anyway, John's Black Clouds Media, and thank you.